The Housing, Safety, and Community Committee under our new name meeting. We'll explain a little bit about what that means, but I will start with a round of introductions. I am Victoria Watlington, serving as your chair, and I'm joined by my new committee who will introduce themselves to you here shortly. And so we will begin with committee members here in person and then online, followed by council members who are joining us in the room. So I'll start with my vice chair to the right.
Good afternoon, everyone. Luana Mayfield, Committee Vice Chair.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Marjorie Molina, Charlotte City Council District 5.
Good afternoon, Renee Johnson, District 4, Committee Member.
Tarek Bakari, Committee Member.
Fantastic, and we are joined by council guests.
Braxton Winston, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And then we will begin with our staff introductions.
Renee Askew, Assistant City Manager and Chief Information Officer.
Sean Heath, Director, Housing and Neighborhood Services.
Rebecca Hefner, Deputy Director, Housing and Neighborhood Services.
Allison Craig, Interim Planning Director.
Tim Porter, Urban Forester, Planning Department.
All righty, thank you. So we'll
Lauren Livingston, Office of Constituent Services.
Gail Whitcomb, Housing and Neighborhood Services.
Thank you. Welcome, welcome. I know we've got guests around the room. We appreciate you attending. We'll start with a real quick agenda review. So today we've got our updated committee charge and procedures. As you heard, we have consolidated our committees, and so we'll talk a little bit about what that means for housing and neighborhood services as well as safety. And then we've got two of our current committee referrals on the docket today. That is neighborhood tree health and development fees. And then we'll talk a little bit about our next committee meeting. Before I go on, did anyone have any questions or adds to this for today's agenda? All righty. Then I will turn it over to Assistant City Manager Askew.
Thank you. So this is a committee that formulated starting with Great Neighborhoods, and then we've expanded that. And so as we go through today, I wanted to make sure that we just level set on what this new committee represents. So starting with the charge, a little bit about the merging of equals, because As the chair talked about, it's a couple of committees that came together to form this one. A little bit about process, and then the referral process, which is what's currently in the pipeline, and then what are some of those standing items. Next slide, please. So when you look at housing, safety, and community, it really involves reviewing and the recommendations and policies associated with the safe and affordable housing and engaging the community to increase safety and promote equity. And so that's the charge for this committee, and so it's broadened from what it was previously. Next slide, please. So as with some of the other committees, you have boards and commissions that are assigned to work with the committee, and a lot of the recommendations oftentimes comes through these boards and commissions. I don't necessarily need to go through each one of these, but it's very important to note that you will see, as I talk a little bit later, there are some referrals that came directly from committees. Next slide, please. Merging of equals. So we have combined Safe Communities and Great Neighborhoods to create Housing, Safety, and the Community Committee. And so it is a combination of those two areas. Next slide, please. Existing referrals. So this committee will be focusing on a number of items that have previously been referred, and that is anti-displacement. And anti-displacement was a referral from the Neighborhood Equity and Stabilization, the NEST committee. And so the recommendations from that committee will continue to be on the agenda for this group. Supporting affordable housing development, and that was a referral that that came through in June 2020. And so looking at feedback from our development community as to how development fees may impact opportunities to leverage affordable housing. Sustaining neighborhood trees, another referral that came through in June. And so this program is all about looking at policies related to tree canopy and maintenance, and you'll hear more about that later on today. Next slide, please. And lastly, we have two standing items, anti-displacement, which we talked a little bit about earlier, and then staying in place pilot programs. And so while we have items that come through this committee based upon what the other committees and boards, commissions recommend, these are some of the items that will consistently be seen on the agenda. Next slide. Any questions? If not, I yield back to the chair. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a whole lot of questions, but I'm not going to ask them all right now. But we just had the next to the last slide just says anti-displacement updates related to NEST as far as a reoccurring item and the staying in place pilot program. I think it would be helpful if, and it may have already been sent out and I just missed the email, but if it hadn't, if the where we are in the staying in place pilot program, the creation and where we are with it, and the updates, if that could be sent to those of us who are returning or new council members so that we can play catch up on this.
Yes, we did have a pre-read in the binder, I think it was a couple of weeks ago. I don't know how much detail it got into with regards to staying in place pilot, so I think that's a great recommendation.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. So, and also with, thank you, Madam Chair, with thinking about how we're moving forward with this new structure and how we currently have a couple of referrals in here, I would like to see if I can do an addition, because we already have on here supporting affordable housing development. I think it would be helpful if we can get an update on current city-owned land. And because I know earlier this year, I believe it was 2018, that there was a proposal where some land went out for a particular, that the city owned, and we accepted some proposals. It will be helpful. Ms. Askew, for full transparency, she and I have already had a discussion specifically off of Columbus Circle. There's 2 to 3 lots that have been identified that have been owned by the city of Charlotte for a number of years, and there's been conversations about potentially developing those lots. I would like to get some definite information because surveying has already started on that land. The challenge is the neighborhood association has not been updated or spoken to about it. The neighbors are not familiar of any potential projects, and the individual who was a part of a local organization that focuses on access to for sale product for working class neighbors of ours, I actually ran into over the weekend, and they are not at the table having a discussion about this particular land. So I would like to make sure that when we're looking at city-owned land, we're looking at making sure the council and committee is aware of opportunities so that we can make sure that we're having as many transparent conversations as possible. So if we're going to be having an update in the very near future, that will be helpful.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear, because we have to yield to the chair whether you want to add this to the agenda. You want us to have a conversation about a list of city-owned land and property and how they're going to be managed?
A list of city-owned land and specifically current land that may be in negotiation
Okay.
with i.e. examples, lots that are currently on Columbus Circle in 28208.
Okay. Are you agreed to put that on the agenda?
I am personally, I would like to check with the remaining committee members. Does anyone have any objection to adding that to a future agenda?
I don't have an objection, but I wanted to add some more to that conversation.
Turn your mic on.
Thank you. I don't have an objection, but I did want to piggyback off what Councilmember Mayfield says. There is, the previous council had a presentation where there's some city-owned land that we were looking at a handful of developers to, I think, donate that land to them for developers. And Mr. Heath and Councilmember Driggs and I had a discussion because I wanted to understand how those developers were chosen from an equitable perspective, if smaller and minority developers were considered or if there was opportunity for that. So if you have that information, just a high-level overview and then some detail in the future, that would be great. Mr. Heath.
If I may, I think it might be beneficial if we have a conversation with the chair and vice chair, because there are probably 3 or 4 different ways that we could come around this. You know, one is we partner with General Services on a periodic basis to evaluate all city-owned land in the portfolio and which of those parcels may be suitable to leverage for affordable housing. And that's what kind of grew into the RFP that ultimately resulted in the recommendations that we made to council in February of 2022, which were the 4 parcels that you mentioned. If you recall, for those 4 parcels, what we asked council's permission for was for us to enter into negotiations, recognizing that before we convey the land, we would have to circle back to council one more time. So you'll all get another bite at that particular apple. But that's kind of the macro level, the work that we do with General Services. And then there are the micro considerations around very specific projects. And I know the one that you're referring to, Councilmember Mayfield. So what I think we need to get a sense from at the staff perspective is, do you want the 30,000-foot level? Do you want the 30-foot level? Do you want something in between? I just want to make sure we deliver back to you the conversation that you're expecting, and probably would entail maybe 15 or 20 minutes to dig through some scenarios and see which one is the most interest to you.
Sure.
Yes. So the answer is yes, for the simple fact land is limited. So it will be helpful for me, and I believe for my colleagues, for us to get an idea prior to a RFP process, for us to have an idea of what land are we looking at, because we are all receiving, even today, multiple emails of individuals that are unfortunately in a need for housing. So if we're looking at city-owned land and looking at the opportunity for a particular partnership, I am more inclined of a partnership that's going to support home ownership versus a partnership of a NOAA that's going to have long-term rental. We approved projects like that earlier this year in that RFP process. I just also want to make sure that the community is aware of conversations of land that is being discussed in their neighborhoods, because when we talk about anti-displacement and aging in place, if the residents are not a part of the conversation, we potentially can have a market rate or another market rate rental opportunity that is developed right in the middle of a residential without community input or at least awareness.
Mayor Pro Tem?
To Mr. Heath's point, staff might also consider updating in this conversation, if you go forward with it, the unsolicited bid process, because that might be land that is not necessarily, in our portfolio that we're thinking about putting on the market, but knowing that process might inform the committee as well.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. And we'll circle up to answer any questions or close any gaps as we bring that piece back.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. We will move now to item number 2, neighborhood tree health.
So for the next 2 items, we're going to have Deputy Director Hefner provide some framing one at a time here, and then she'll invite in some other department leaders to join the conversation. So Deputy Director.
Thank you. So we have 2 items today to discuss on the agenda. Both of them are policy referrals from June. So we'll start with the Sustaining Neighborhoods Tree Health referral. So we'll do a quick overview of the policy question and the committee charge, talk a little bit about Charlotte's tree canopy, our current policy framework, and the tree canopy programs, both previous, current, and what that might look like in the future. So I'm going to hand this over to the city arborist, Mr. Porter, in just a moment, but this is in the context of the referrals that came out in June. There were actually 2 tree referrals. So some of you have heard a portion of this presentation previously at the Environment, Equity, and Engagement Committee, EEE, when Mr. Porter presented to that committee. And today is going from that larger policy question that EEE looked at to a little bit more specific question, which is really around how do we assist residents in caring for heritage trees? So council members who have been at this for a while may remember a pilot program back in 2018 that was done in Wesley Heights around large tree maintenance and assistance. This is the latest iteration of that discussion. So we'll take a look at what are some best practices, what are some things the city has done previously, what does the policy framework look like today, especially in consideration of the adoption of the Unified Development Ordinance, and then where do we go from here? So with that, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Mr. Porter.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Good afternoon, council members. First of all, let's talk about why we're even talking about trees. This is a very high-level but important snapshot of annual benefits Charlotte's canopy provides in multiple focus areas. So it's a machine that provides a lot of benefits to the city. It also provides social and economic benefits as well. Next slide, please. So as we talk about heritage trees today, for many months, you've heard us talking about heritage trees in a very regulatory-only perspective. This is going to be a broader discussion. We're going to cover part of the regulatory component of what a heritage tree is, but also in general talk about why they're important to the community and residents, why we're now going to regulate them in the UDO, and also large trees in general. So a heritage tree is defined in the UDO as a native North Carolina tree species that's 30 inches in diameter or larger. Oaks, maples, tulip poplars are examples of those types of trees. So that's a very specific designation of the greater large tree bucket. So before the comprehensive plan, the city has known for a long time that residents really value large mature trees. But during the Tree Canopy Action Plan and the 2040 Comprehensive Plan, it was really clarified and emphasized in community feedback that these trees hold great value and they should be protected on a higher level. So again, they provide significant benefits, but also there's a flip side to that, which is maintaining them. And they're very expensive and challenging to maintain, especially on private, to look at helping the community care for these trees. Next slide, please. So as I said earlier, there was extensive feedback in the Tree Canopy Action Plan, which was a companion project to the comprehensive plan. There's a great value placed on heritage trees and large trees, and our analysis showed that many other communities throughout the country protect these trees. One of the major recommendations that came out of TCAP in the 2040 Comprehensive Plan was to provide support via a large tree assistance program. I'm dropping a lot of acronyms right now, apologies for that, but LTAP is one more. And in the comprehensive plan, there's a policy adopted to support providing maintenance and assistance on trees on private land for vulnerable and underserved communities. Next slide, please. So real briefly, there's a lot of text there, but I'm going to cover the dual nature of the UDO's heritage tree regulation. In the UDO, on the development side of this regulation, heritage trees cannot be removed unless there's a demonstrated conflict. The preservation intent with this regulation is low. There's a high focus on mitigation and tracking, so we can come back in a number of years to report back to see if there is need for greater preservation. The mitigation for developers is approximately $1,500 and one tree, excuse me, it's $1,500 and replant at least one tree on the property. That can be reduced if the developer plants additional trees, $250 for each additional tree. So that's kind of one of the natures of the regulation. The next one, next slide, please, is for non-development scenarios. So this part of the regulation was placed outside the UDO in the standalone tree ordinance because it's not development triggered. This is a big step because as of June 1st, all heritage trees in the city of Charlotte will be protected. And we're going to work to get the word out to make sure property owners and residents are aware that at that point in time, they can remove a heritage tree, but there's a permit that needs to be obtained. And there's a mitigation component as well that's lower for property owners than it is for developers. That's $500 a tree removed with one tree replanted. And of course, any hazardous or declining trees can be removed. We emphasize that there's a need sometimes to take action when there's a dangerous tree. And we'll be providing a lot of outreach and guidance in the near future to help property owners understand how they can do that. Next slide, please. So there's a number of canopy programs today and previously that focused on large tree preservation, but not specifically on an intentional neighborhood scale, tree-by-tree approach. The Tree Canopy Preservation Program preserves land, taking developer-paid fees collected during permitting, and acquires land for preservation. There are many heritage trees on these properties, but we're not targeting those trees specifically. The Trees Charlotte Partnership is contributing to a sustainable tree canopy by planting more trees that one day will become heritage trees and large trees. The Tree by Tree Initiative is a new program created by General Services and the City Arborist Group. It's an online interface where community members can put their trees into a map, and they can quantify the benefits the trees on their property or in their neighborhood provide. So that's really new. And looking forward, we hope that the Canopy Care program will soon become a robust community assistance program that will help residents take care of trees, remove trees if needed, provide cost assistance and expertise, technical expertise assistance, but also replanting support as well. Next slide, please. And as Rebecca mentioned earlier, in 2018, there was a pilot project working with the Wesley Heights neighborhood. General Services and Housing and Neighborhood Services worked together with that community to help out 9 homeowners. It was about $25,000 provided to, I don't think we removed 17 trees, but they removed many, and we trimmed and reduced the risk of some trees. What we learned is that the need is great. We understand that we need a better understanding of how many of these trees are out there. There are many. And that's one of the reasons why the preservation intent is low in the UDO, because we need to have a better understanding how many trees are out there, how they impact the community, impact development. One study conducted by UNCC in Revolution Park suggested that 30% of that neighborhood's trees were heritage trees, but 60% of the benefits of that entire canopy were provided by those heritage trees. That's very important. That could support stronger regulations or stronger support for community programs. We need to know that in a larger scale across the city. We understand the need is great. They need regular inspection. These trees You know, they're living things just like us, and over time, more care and maintenance, the better they're going to be, the more the benefits they're going to provide, the longer they're going to live. And there is a need to support residents in the management of those trees. They're very expensive. The cost to remove those trees ranges between $3,000 to $10,000 in some cases, and that is a significant investment for any homeowner. Next slide, please. So one of the next steps right now is to conduct another large tree assistance project within the Staying in Place pilot program. And this is an opportunity for us to really flesh out needed details to further develop a framework for this program. The neighborhoods we're going to focus on are Washington Heights, Hidden Valley, and Winterfield. We're looking to invest much higher resources this time around, $200,000 to support residents. Assessments, it's a multi-step program. Assessments are needed. So we have to assess the trees, work with community members to determine how bad their tree is it high risk, is there action needed, and to compare that to all the other trees in that area that are in the program that qualify, to prioritize. It's going to be a very exciting, interesting program. I expect to learn a lot from this and work with my colleagues in general services to develop a functioning framework internally with the city, and also talk to potential program partners to see how long-term we can make this more than just a pilot project. Next slide, please. I did want to note that the framework, and I'll say it's a high-level intent and purpose framework and funding framework, is adopted in the UDO. The program management framework is not there. But the intent and purpose to use mitigation fees that are collected during permitting for the removal of heritage trees to support this program, that's in there. So I think there is likely going to be a dedicated resource for that program. It may not be enough to realize the full potential. We may need to look to partner with groups like Tree Charlotte or corporate sponsorships to really make sure the program is on a citywide scale effective. But there is a framework in place adopted in the UDO that says we can use those mitigation fees to support this program. The program focuses in a number of different areas: large tree assessments, helping removing and making safe large trees, but also replanting. And there's also a grant program component within that framework that will help neighborhoods long-term. It's not just a one and done. Sometimes the tree is removed, that risk is averted immediately, and there's replanting, but sometimes we're going to help you trim your tree now. It's still safe and sustainable to provide benefits for a number of years, but we want to make sure that we're there at some point in the future. And that's where the grant concept may come in, that a homeowner or a resident can continue to come back to this program from some level of support. It may not be the same as day one, but support from a technical expertise perspective or additional maintenance needs. And as I said earlier, next steps include really focusing on the Staying in Place pilot project to see how to flesh out the details of the program management framework. And talk to more program partners and identify additional funding needs and sources to make sure this is a fully robust, functioning program and not just a pilot project. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'll open up to the floor for any questions. I've got one or two, but wanted to, I don't see any questions. Did you have one?
I just want to make sure that, kind of in line with the question I was asked earlier about city-owned real estate, I'd like for us to keep an eye on, whether we're doing everything that we can on our own property to preserve and promote canopy health. So really kind of looking back, do we have as many trees as possible, planted in a healthy way that is going to kind of add to the canopy moving forward? Sort of I guess, a city-owned action plan,
Absolutely. I can work with the manager's office and my colleagues in general services. Aaron Oliverio is here today, and we're partnering three departments, housing, neighborhood services, planning, and general services to move this program forward. So that aspect of it, we certainly can work with the manager's office and see what we have and see how we can manage it to its full potential for canopy benefits.
Vice Chair?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Similar, okay, on the same street, not on the same page, as my colleague, Mayor Pro Tem. We have seen a number of new developments that have come up within the last, we'll say, 5 years. Is there an opportunity to strengthen the relationship, say, with Tree Charlotte? Since Tree Charlotte is an amazing program, teaches you a lot that you need to know, to look at utilizing that partnership in this goal that we have with City of Trees. So if you don't want a fence in your little limited 10 feet of space and you want to actually plant trees, that may be something that we can also look to quantify by partnering with Tree Charlotte to see if people are identifying the opportunity to plant in newer neighborhoods, because you're going to have a different challenge with the fact that we have the red dirt, and because that land has been clear cut and you have a lot of debris and other things once that land gets leveled. So it might take a little longer, or it might be some different opportunities with planting, but that might be another opportunity where we can help with our tracking in this program with some of the newer neighborhoods, whether they are for sale or lease communities, if they are residential neighborhoods, seeing if we can have some conversations, mainly those that are coming in for rezonings, because those are the ones that we would have first access to have conversations about Charlotte's tree canopy and connecting them, and that be part of that conversation, in not in lieu of, but in partnership of, we'll reduce the amount based on X number of trees, having an extended conversation of the placement of those trees.
That's a great point. That's some really good insight. We realize this is a comprehensive need, is to, if we're supporting tree canopy and efforts, that it's not just plant it and walk away, or remove the tree, everything's safe now, and walk away. We're actually in talks right now with Tree Charlotte. They're conducting their own pilot project in Revolution Park. So it makes sense to see if we can partner, because the idea is, I mean, it's a great idea to get behind. So I think it's a great opportunity to leverage more resources to make it more successful. So we can definitely keep this committee and council updated on how that discussion is going. I think that's probably the third next step bullet that's missing, is just talk to Tree Charlotte and other partners in more detail to see what type of framework we can all work together on.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. I've got a couple of questions just to round this discussion out. The first one is, I know we're talking about removal, and you may have already said this, but just for clarification, is relocation considered in this program?
It can be, if the tree in question is feasible. That's a very costly effort, is to relocate a large tree. The trees in this program that we're helping residents with may not be heritage trees. They may not be that big in every case. In some cases, they may just be in the wrong place. So that's an aspect we haven't brought in before to the program, but it's something that I'm interested in looking at in more detail.
Okay. The next thing is, in light of what we're about to talk about as far as development fees, when we talk about mitigation charges here, I just want to lift that up, that we want to make sure that that works in concert with each other as we talk about how do we create more affordable housing through optimizing development fees, how this plays a role in that. And with that, I'm wondering if we have considered, after these trees are removed, is there a way to recoup cost or be able to reuse or further our sustainability goals with the lumber that will come from these trees? I realize it's not going to be huge volume, but if there's a way that we can close the loop on that, that will be an opportunity. Does that make sense?
It does, yes. We've talked internally about a circular economy of wood products, and we've had a number of ideas and partners over time. Nothing has come forward yet, but I think we are a great resource of wood that could be utilized for many things, so that's a great idea. We've looked at even providing wood to, I think it was Martin Guitars once a couple of years ago. It didn't pan out, but I think it's a great idea, and I can work with Aaron's team to do that because they're managing the trees, so they have the expertise to kind of direct how that would work. So.
Awesome. And then I'm assuming the answer is yes, but I'll ask anyway. As we talk about tracking private trees, is the goal to get to a point where we can preemptively go in and engage residents as their trees begin to age out, if you will?
I think on a general level, Yes, I don't think we'll ever get to a point where we know when that tree is kind of coming to a point where it needs to get a checkup. There's just too many to be on top of that. But generally, from a neighborhood scale, absolutely. Yeah, from a neighborhood scale, we're exploring things like the tree by tree program that General Services is starting, where people can put their trees into this new citywide map, and we can help them understand through communication and benefits quantification of how their tree is doing. Also, this new program that can provide outreach and not just to vulnerable and underserved communities, but that's the priority. We're also talking internally about, we're going to track it through permitting as well, but we need to understand on a higher level, and this is where down the road we'll talk more about canopy analysis. How many of these trees are out there? Where are they? Like I said, UNCC studied Revolution Park, and there's thousands of those trees there, and they're providing a lot of benefits. We need to know more about, on a neighborhood scale, as they're aging out. We have an aging tree canopy issue in Charlotte. We need to know on a more detailed level the timing of that on a neighborhood scale. So we're working towards that.
Great. And then finally, as we think about, again, this whole idea of a circular economy, or at least a broader supply chain, we've talked a lot about our vendor system, and we've talked about our CBI goals and other. How have we started having the conversation around how do we pre-qualify vendors, or so that we can realize some economies of scale through working with some consistent partners in this?
I don't know if we have done that. I can check with General Services and the manager's office and get some responses for you.
Sure. I think that would be great in terms of a potential economic saving, and then also from an efficiency standpoint, as we're working one-to-one with residents, if we already have a queue of pre-qualified vendors that we know could come out and provide quotes, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, we are working, that's a great idea. We are working on a part of this assistance program is we're toying with names like the Queen's Canopy Team or something of kind of credentialed tree care landscape companies or tree care companies that would be already kind of stamp of approval from the city. If they know what they're doing, they know how to give, and they're trusted, and they'll give you an honest quote. As I said earlier, this is really expensive work. So we're working from that perspective on like a contractor to help take the tree down. We're starting to develop ideas for that, but we can look at a broader program view too.
Awesome. Go ahead, Ms. Mayfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You actually touched on something that I think we have another opportunity on, and that is in the city not trying to create another financial line item with identifying a contractor. Trees Charlotte, honestly, is one of our highlights with looking at our equity. So thanks to Sean and her team, staff has already done the numbers and broken down for us how our equity goes, and looking through a diversity equity lens, how our opportunities are available. So Trees Charlotte, I think they had a goal of 10% of partnership. Their end result was 48.51%. So they already have specifically Black-owned and minority-owned businesses that they have been partnering with. So opposed to the city potentially creating another budget line item, here's yet another opportunity to expand because they already get it. We have some organizations, as was mentioned, that we fund or support that might not have met goals or may have had much lower goals and could not meet them. Those who are meeting and exceeding the goals, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can utilize them and basically see if we can expand that partnership in a way where they can be that referring organization, and that helps to continue to ensure that local businesses are receiving access to the opportunities within our city.
I think that's a great idea. Does anybody else have anything? Councilmember Bakari, is he good? Okay. So with that then, thank you. And we will move to our final policy item for the day, supporting affordable housing development.
All right, policy item number 2 for today. So first trees, now fees. And so whoever else in the room is a fan of The Princess Bride, I can guarantee you that somebody in my office has said to me this past week, no more rhyming now, I mean it. I'll be sad to see this agenda move into the past. So today we're talking about development fees as it relates to affordable housing. So again, we'll touch on the policy question and the committee charge. We'll look at an overview of the development fees that are in place today, what they are, what they fund, how they're calculated, and what some of the opportunities are and some of the constraints there. And then this is really part one of the discussion for committee. Today we want to get your feedback and hear your thoughts and find out what you're hearing from stakeholders. Next slide, please. The policy question, again, this was referred in June. The policy question, are there options available for the city to implement to lessen the financial burden that development fees place on affordable housing developments? So today, I'm actually going to also hand over the presentation reins. I have a great role today, and let Interim Planning Director Allison Craig walk you through the presentation.
Thanks, Rebecca. Next slide, please. So affordable housing is a tough issue because there's not a singular solution. And so you really need to be looking at a full suite and a toolbox of things to be able to help tackle the issue. And so I think it's valuable to look at it as it relates to the development process, because that is a continuum and there needs to be different tools as it relates to different parts of the development process. And so financing could come in terms of housing trust fund, gap financing. We'll talk a little bit about regulations and design, and that's where the UDO comes into play in terms of incentives and flexibility. And then the fees really come from the construction side of things. So that's the fees that you pay when you're getting ready for construction and you're filing for your permits. Next slide. So I want to mention really quickly just the landscape for permitting here with the City of Charlotte. So in 2019, the city manager had this idea of a one-stop shop. I mentioned this earlier today too. And this is really to create this collaborative group of 6 different city departments all co-located together with sort of a collaborative way to approach permitting. And while that benefits everyone, it's also very useful for the affordable housing projects because they often have a much more time-sensitive nature to getting their permits. And so all the different city departments are involved in this. Shown up here, and this is the oversight is provided by planning, and Shannon Fry is here, who really oversees this work as well. Next slide. So just want to talk about what the fees are and why we have them. And so we've got 2 different buckets of fees. First, you've got your plan review fees, and these are really charged for the person who's coming in with a project. It's very specific to that project. And so the fees are related to the costs that it takes for staff to do the permit review, any indirect costs associated with that. And the idea is really since 2005 is that we have a policy goal of 100% cost recovery for the plan review process. There's another bucket that relates to infrastructure fees, and there's sort of 2 of these. You've got your connection fees, and that's fairly self-explanatory. This is connecting to the water main and getting the meter and the service line to the property. You also have your system development fees, and this is really looking at the cost of adding the infrastructure, like including your treatment facilities. Next slide. So legal framework, and we've got legal in the room too, so I won't get too far out of my lane on this, but what we've learned along the way is you cannot waive fees. So you can reimburse fees in certain situations, but you cannot waive fees. There's actually even a recent a blog from the UNC School of Government on this, and you can get some more information. I'd be happy to share that with the committee. So you cannot waive them on the front end for specific classes of customers. You can only vary the fees if the service is related to why you're charging that particular fee, not because of a certain group of individuals or a certain thing you're trying to accomplish. And then also the methodology for calculating the system development fees for Charlotte Water is a capacity buy-in. It's related to proportion costs of each user's share, and Angela is here and can certainly provide more information on that should you want to. Next slide. So if we do a reimbursement, these can only be reimbursed if the project furthers a public purpose, and there's very specific language in the Housing Authority state statutes about this, and you'll see this because it kind of relates to some of the incentives that we provide in the UDO. So affordable housing is an allowable public purpose, but it has to be 20% of the units are affordable at 60% AMI. And so that's really what our legal allowances are at this point from a state level. And so this certainly makes it even more challenging when you're talking about single-family housing and affordability there. And then furthermore, it's even more clearly defined as it relates to our enterprise fund, so particularly Charlotte Water. So this, if you do reimburse these fees, they cannot come from the utility fund. They have to come from the general fund, PAYGO, some other place besides that particular utility, which makes it even more challenging because you have to have a funding source then for it, for reimbursement. Next slide. So fees vary, and we're going to show you an example of 3 different projects and what the fees are. And so the fees vary. They can be dependent on a per acre charge, like stormwater. Different types of development have different fees associated with them. Not all projects have the same fees. And some projects may even have a fee in lieu, and that's kind of incorporated into the total fee amount. And then we're also, over time, we've added some enhanced and expedited options for people, and that is an additional fee for to be able to have an accelerated review time. So on average, for these 3 projects that we're going to just go over real briefly, plan reviews are averaging about $20,000, so that's for the city side, and the water fees are averaging about $232,000. So next slide. So back before the pandemic, we were talking about this, and Pam Weidman and I were talking about some different ideas to enhance the affordable housing toolbox. And so we had some numbers. So these are 2019 numbers, just to be clear. But I think it just provides a good comparison of 3 different projects that received Housing Trust Fund financing. And so you can see for the city of Charlotte, I mean, the first one also has a fee in lieu for trees baked into that. That's why that fee is a little higher. But they tend to average around $20,000. Charlotte Water is, depending on the project size, anywhere from $140 to $300. And so the fees vary and sort of are somewhat related to the total project cost. But you can also see too that in each of these, they've also received Housing Trust Fund financing, which can really, help to offset all the project costs, including the cost of fees. Next slide. So with the UDO, we did an economic impact analysis, and one of the key groups that we had as part of this analysis, and really actually spread throughout the entire project altogether, was really talking to affordable housing developers, because as on the sort of the second slide or the second bullet point, heard a lot that it wasn't just fees that create challenges, it's having some design flexibility options to help like anything that helps reduce the barriers, reduce cost barriers, and certainly time barriers is a benefit to affordable housing projects. We started with TOD, and we have a bonus height provision there, and I believe with that we've committed nearly $8 million towards the Housing Trust Fund and allows some additional height, and the UDO sort of expands on that with many additional zoning districts being able to utilize that. But that wasn't really quite enough. There were more things that we needed to do, and so I'll go over that on the next slide. But we sat down and we talked through what is the flexibility that you need in order to help make these projects more feasible for you. And then lastly, the expediting permit review. That's something that we've also been talking about. Again, right now we have a fee that people pay to expedite, and so that would also need to come as a function of a reimbursement. But that's something also that we could talk through. Is there another way that we can help move these projects through faster? Next slide. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. So when we started talking through the UDO, we've been working really closely with Housing and Neighborhood Services. And what we really talked through in terms of the UDO is what are we trying to accomplish in terms of reducing these barriers. And so, of course, it's reducing costs. We've talked about that a lot. But then 2 other main things that Housing and Neighborhood Services and Planning talked a lot about is wanting to make more people include affordable projects in their affordable units in their projects. And so it's not just about an affordable housing developer and then a market rate developer. We want to have mixed income properties, and so wanting to have make it easier to do the right thing. And we also wanted to make sure if we are doing this, we want to preserve that affordability for longer term. So we increase the length of time that those units would have to be affordable. Next slide. So this is in the UDO now. This is 16.4. This is a start, and we're always looking to add to this. But these are the list of development allowances, and while they're small, they're actually fairly impactful. So the first one I'll use as an example. So if you provide the affordable units at the terms that are on the right column, then you can move to the next zoning district. So in essence, your zoning district doesn't change, but it's de facto a by right rezoning because you can use all of the development standards of the next higher zoning district. And so that's a pretty helpful thing to be able to get more units as a result of the affordability requirements that you would have to have in order to get that. There's potentially waiving new street requirements. We've worked really closely with CDOT on that when that makes sense. We've talked about trees. Tim mentioned a little bit earlier about, about trees, that was something that was really important to them too, that having some greater flexibility because for trees. And so they, a lot of what we heard of was that we want to have trees in our communities. It's very important to have trees in our affordable projects, but we just want some additional flexibility with planning. So that was added in. And then finally, reimbursing the cost for sidewalks. Again, going back to the state statutes, if we're starting to talk about dollar amounts, then we need to go to what's outlined in the Housing Authority state statute. So that's why the terms is a little bit different. So 30 years is what we have in the UDO, a minimum of 5 units. And we've broken it out depending on what the AMI is proposed. Then if you provide this unit at a lower AMI, then the set-aside requirements have to be less. And we're also going to look to the equitable growth framework from the comprehensive plan, and there's access to housing. There's parameters about housing costs and really trying to tie a set-aside that's connected to places where housing costs are high and reduce that from the 30% to 20% in those particular areas. Next slide. And so really, I think at this point, we are looking to the committee for feedback. And so, do we wait and see what happens with the UDO, and does this help relieve some of the cost pressure for affordable units? We've gotten great feedback from the affordable housing developers that while the bonus that we have in today's ordinance has never been used, that they really think that these are going to be tools that will be very helpful and help bring more affordable units to our community. Then there's a tune-up process that Housing and Neighborhood Services is working on. Or is there something more that we need to do? Is there a reimbursement program that you all want to explore? And so at this point, we really are looking for feedback from you all about next steps.
Bless you. All right, I'll open it up to the floor. Councilman Johnson?
You all. We all know. So, Ms. Craig, I would like to just applaud you. This is great. But I have some questions. Thank you. I really wanted to run over and give her a hug. But, if we can go to the next to the last slide, or the one that, page 13 or slide 13, please. I wanted to understand, is that either or?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that.
Thank you.
These are stackable. You can use whatever applies. If you can use any of them, they're all available to you.
So a developer can use just one of these on the left side and not develop affordable units?
No, so if a project wanted to build to the zoning districts of the next greater intensity, and they had an option to waive their new street requirements, and they could reimburse their site, they could use as many of the things on the left as long as they provided 30% of the units at 80% AMI or 15% at 60%. And so we want to create true incentives for people to include these in their properties.
Okay. And I noticed there that we didn't address the 30% AMI. I know that's tough. That's our greatest need in our city. So was there any discussion about that, or?
We talked a lot about
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about that. And the what we're trying to do with the current development allowances is to incentivize developers, both our affordable and our market rate developers, to get to that 80% level, sometimes down to 60%, such that the city's investments can then be shifted more towards the 30% AMI. So when we have, the city has a limited bucket of funding for affordable housing, and we're going through this tune-up process to figure out what are the priorities. And if we can get more of the 80% units, for example, to be coming from these kind of development incentives, then we don't have to spend the city's dollars on those 80% units, and we're able to shift lower to 30%. So that's the grand idea. But what we're trying to do is start with incentives that would get as many units as possible, and then we can tune this up along the way. We didn't want to put anything down to 30% at the very start, because we want people to take advantage of it. And then if we find that we're able to get lower in AMI, then council can make some of those adjustments through the process of adjustments.
The text amendment.
Text amendment, thank you, in the UDO.
So this is a wonderful first step. But I would like to see, because there is the deficit of, 30% AMI, it's like a 20 or 30,000 unit deficit. But there's also a deficit at 80% and 60%. So is there an opportunity for a greater incentive for developers who are willing to develop some units at 30%?
I mean, we can certainly look at that. This is the first stab. We really haven't had a menu like this before. And I think that we will only add to this. And so, I mean, maybe there's another column, maybe at some point it's only stackable if you are down in those kinds of AMI, but we're certainly open to having more conversations about what this needs to look like.
I just think it's important for council to stand up for those most vulnerable residents. We know the challenge, even with the land in Valentine, that was donated, and those residents are excluded from that. So I think everything that we do as a city, we have to be intentional about including that group. This is awesome, but I think we need to be very, very, very intentional about not excluding that group. I mean, those are the ones we get the emails from that are in the shelter and in the hotels and in Tent City. So I think that every opportunity that we get in creating policies, we need to ensure that there's solutions for that group. That's all I have right now. Thank you.
Councilmember Johnson, Councilmember Molina.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Every time I hear the word affordable, I'm always like looking for a position, right? Because in my opinion, it has always been, because to me at this AMI, for me it feels and sounds like workforce housing, which is still not a bad thing. These are, solutions that are targeted to our workforce. And, although I absolutely agree with my colleague, we do have a severe need for some of our most vulnerable residents. I come from the school of thought that place in the middle, in my opinion, is one of the hardest places to be. It really is. Because once you come away from 30% AMI, in most cases, you do not have any type of wraparound services. So everything about life costs more. If you have a family, you have to, you got transportation, you got childcare, you got all of these other resources that you're now responsible for on your own. And so the idea that we can make our workforce have more livable options, I'm the biggest fan of ever. Because if you're going to work every day, what my deepest, and that's not to say at 30% AMI, you're not going to work every day also. And those are our stakeholders and our community members where we need to look for more living wage opportunities for them so that they can build their way out of what is, you know, a situation where they also will probably need additional wraparound services to achieve that. But I guess I'm saying I'm happy to see this, even at this index of AMI, simply because, you know, if you think about that level of AMI, that's likely also a person who's going to work every day. Their wage is probably considered living. And unfortunately, in many cases, they can't afford to live in our city. And so I really feel like, and I'm very sensitive to that particular place. And with the idea of upward economic mobility, I feel like we miss it every single time because we focus on one particular area of AMI. What happens then if we don't look at that continuum in, let's say, you know, if you start at 30% AMI, what does it mean to now achieve 50% or 60% AMI, you know, and there are no resources, and now you're left with nothing, you know, which could inevitably send you to homelessness. You know, you can go from like working hard, you know, come out of, you know, what would be some of our lowest percentages of AMI in our city, and then have a catastrophe happen and be homeless. You know, so it's like climbing a ladder and one of the hinges breaking. So I'm high-fiving on this. I know that we have a very variable area of need, but 60%, you know, that mid-range, in my opinion, and I don't know this from a quantitative perspective, but I estimate that that is our workforce. Is that what this is? Or is it just an estimation? When we say affordability, how do we then attach that to a tangible understanding of what that means? I guess is a question I would have as well.
Sure. So when we talk about affordable housing, we're really looking at the range at all of the different levels of area median income. So we don't necessarily use different terms for 30% or 80%, or even, you know, when we're talking about home ownership, we're often talking about 110%. And so in our strategy, we think of it as affordable housing broadly, and we do break down and look at the different levels of AMI, how much need there is at the varying levels, and consider how households move across that continuum of AMI, you know, on a daily basis.
Right, constantly,
you're
right?
partnering up, you're having babies, you know, like
Right. You go to the grocery store, the bill is you have a car repair, and literally you go from like 50% AMI that week to 30 because you had like a car repair that.
And so what, you know, council has set a goal specific to the 30% AMI of your investments and incorporating 20% of units at 30% AMI. So there are some targets in place as it relates to the lower end of the income spectrum. But we don't typically distinguish between different types of housing. Our goal is to really create affordable opportunities across that entire spectrum, recognizing that there are working families at every level of that AMI, even
Absolutely.
at 30%. And so, you know, just trying to, within our strategy, think about which particular strategy matches the right AMI level. So, for example, with our first take here, we're matching the development allowances to the 60 and 80% AMI. However, if a affordable housing developer were also getting housing trust fund dollars and utilizing these allowances, they would also have to do the 20% at 30% AMI. And so as you start to stack the the slide that Allison showed at the beginning of, here are all the different ways we can support affordable housing, all the way from financing to operations. As you start to stack across that development lifetime, you can actually get different levels of AMI depending on which program you're utilizing.
If I could just mention one thing, and I might be giving myself a homework assignment here, but as it relates to the 30% AMI and below level, to Deputy Director Hefner's point, if you think about everything we do at the Housing Trust Fund, at least 20% of those units will be for 30% AMI or below. Everything that we've done historically with our naturally occurable affordable housing investments has actually been able to deliver a commitment of 30% of the units for 30% AMI or below. And with the 4 city-owned land proposals that we received early this year that council approved for negotiations, 3 of the 4 were for multifamily units, somewhere close to 290 units. And in each case, each of those proposals contemplated having some units set aside for 30% and below. And then there are a number of things that we've done in the last year with some of our federal funds, whether it be emergency rental assistance or investments in rental subsidies and supportive services that have really targeted the 30% and below market. So I just wanted to reinforce that it's something we'd be happy to do at any point, either via a white paper or a quick conversation, that when you look at our full suite of programs, there are a number of things I think the city of Charlotte can stand tall on and point to and to demonstrate our support for that particular segment of the market.
That would be great. If we could get those numbers, that would be.
I knew I gave myself.
Well, I'll also add that you're going to see more of that next month, potentially at the committee meeting or in the coming months when the Housing Trust Fund tune-up information comes back to committee. Because one of the things that committee asked of us as part of that Housing Trust Fund tune-up process was to consider, what are the right projects for that funding source, but also how do we align funding sources by project so that you're getting more of a comprehensive look at what your investments are doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Did you have some?
I did, but I know Mr. Portel has something as well.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Something that stood out to me on slide number 8, if the committee's going to continue to kind of look at fee structures, what it says that cost of reimbursement has to be borne by the general and the non-utility revenues. And to me, what that says, and correct me if I'm wrong, basically the enterprise fund would have to be reimbursed through taxpayer dollars. And so therefore, property taxes would have to fund this. I'm not great at math, especially kind of playing these out, in great numbers. But at some point in time, if you do buy so much reimbursement, right, those fees are going to have to be taken up not by the ratepayer, i.e. the developer, by homeowners or renters through increased rent. So if we're going to we want to make sure we're not kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul if this committee kind of wants to go down that route. So how do, if we want to consider different types of reimbursement models, I think it would be really good for council to be able to kind of quantifiably look at, okay, is this fair? Is this fair to ask renters and taxpayers to bear the costs that developers would be? And I think we as a community have said that we all feel like we, should bear some costs overall to get different levels of affordability. But there would seem to be some type of kind of quantifiable way of analyzing this for us to kind of determine whether it's fair or not. And I think it would be really important for us to have that information if committee kind of continues to move forward down this path.
I'll just add real quick too. I mean, however, if we do consider any kind of reimbursement, to your point, I mean, really trying to maximize what dollars you're using and for what, and for the biggest, buck for your bang, or bang for your buck rather. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm using that from now on.
Dignity in all work. Go ahead, Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're thinking about the introduction of the full suite of programs that we have. I think I heard in there the opportunity to expand the conversations. I share concerns regarding the ability to waive the fee in lieu, and how those funds are reimbursed to developers. At the end of the day, there's a cost to development. There's a cost to doing business in the city of Charlotte. Unfortunately, whether it's accurate or the perception, part of the language in parts of the community is that that cost is already being bared by the residents of the city, not the developers, which in large part are not local and are not invested long-term in our community outside of a development. So with taking that in consideration, I would like for us to just look at some other communities and how they were able to encourage development in a way to know that, yes, there is a cost to doing business in the city, and that cost is going to benefit our residents. I also would like to commend staff for all the presentations, because you have been doing some really amazing work during the years that I've been away from council. So even in a very trying time with us going through a pandemic. So some of the things that we talked about previously when it was HAND committee with Councilmember Driggs and I, you all have taken to another level. I really appreciated the fact that our housing trust funds are being looked at in a very different light, and how we move forward with that, even with the project that was approved from the proposal by Habitat for Humanity, for them to go into a NOAA and be able to turn those into condos. We have some opportunities, because those that have been around for a while know I've had challenges with how we support investments with NOAAs that are still long-term rentals, because who benefits the most is the owner of that apartment complex or that multifamily complex. So opportunities that we have for other growth that creates condos, townhomes, that create ownership opportunities, I think we have a real opportunity in with how we look at moving forward. But I do want us to consider, when we look at our AMI, we're limited. The federal government helps to determine what that looks like. So if you're a family of two and you're at that 60%, that means you can make $45,240. We're not even talking about a family of 6, 7, and 8, just for two individuals. We have a lot of young couples that are just starting out, and Madam Chair, which she may go into it much better and more detail, but when you think about if you get a little bit of our assistance, how does that impact your other financial assistance? Because it very well could put you in a different tax bracket. So if we step back and look at those considerations as well, when we're looking at these numbers, I think it will also be helpful when we're speaking to the development community, so that we can be as transparent as possible and get to the point where we, for council, and I'm only going to speak for the I don't have a project that's inconsistent with what we said we put out there, but yet we're asking for approval of it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure thing. Yes, to follow up on what you just mentioned, one of the things that I would love to see, we were over here looking at our AMI chart. It would be great, as we think about getting the full picture of that, if we could include tax implications at each one of those HMI levels, and then also any assistance that would be available through wraparound services or our I'll say government assistance programs, because as many of my colleagues have talked about before, that benefits cliff is real. So just as we update that chart, that would be great to be able to understand holistically what is the true net income in the household, or at least the opportunity, because certainly everybody that's at each level isn't necessarily taking advantage of all of the programs for whatever reason. But I think that helps us to further conceptualize the picture there. The next thing I want to talk about, or reiterate, if you will, from my colleagues, is this idea of for sale units and how do we incorporate that? I too echo my colleagues in that I'm happy to see us thinking outside the box and being very creative in the opportunities. So thank you for this work. It's definitely significant, and I'm excited about the possibilities here. I'm interested to see if, as we think about slide 13 again, were we able to get any ideas of sample projects, if you will, that might fall into these categories, and what that looks like from a rental standpoint versus a for sale?
So unfortunately, when we're doing the regulations, we can't say this is for sale or this is for rent. Like, we're not allowed to differentiate between those. And so, I mean, I think you and I had a number of conversations about the UDO, just trying to make sure that nothing in there is creating any kind of roadblocks for any kind of for sale product, because we want to make sure that that opportunity is available, because that's a very important part of economic mobility is the for sale component. So I'm not sure from the regulatory standpoint, I really have anything I can really move the needle too much either way. I just make sure that I'm not getting in the way, and then Housing and Neighborhood Services can take it from there.
And I think part of it is that these development allowances also apply if you're doing for sale development. So as long as you have a minimum of 5 units and they are meeting these thresholds, 30% at AMI and 20% at 60%. And again, that 20% at 60%, when it comes to reimbursement, that's state, state mandated, so we can't flex there. But these would also apply to for sale.
Okay, so I see the 30-year affordability term as a requirement here. That would lead me to believe that this is only available to rental units, but what I'm hearing you say is it's also available to for sale developers? Am I understanding that correctly?
That's a good question.
I'll just pause for a moment and give legal a second to confer.
Yes. I was just asking, colleague, what is your deed
Yeah.
restriction?
Mr. Powers for the City Attorney's Office, or Ms. Schlins, whichever one.
Nah, you wouldn't move, but I was asking Anna Sloinis, who is actually counsel for Neighborhood and Housing Services, for sale type of situations, would it be a deed restriction that would actually show for that current owner and future owners how it would be moving up in a market rate? So that would be how you could do it for a sale type of situation.
Fantastic.
Now,
Thank you.
I will say, only because I'm relaying this from my quick conversation, if you have any additional questions, it would be better.
Go over there, go to her.
I love that. Thank you for that. One second. Thank you for that. So then just as a follow-up to that, as we think about the types of projects here, and the reason I ask this question is because you mentioned this bonus height provision here, and we know that while it's been offered, there haven't been many takers on it, just because when you start to look at the project financials, it doesn't become as attractive. Have we given any sanity check, if you will, to what kinds of projects might actually pencil out with these items?
So first, I want to say, going back to the bonus height, it just takes some time for those projects actually to get constructed, and there's a great deal more that's committed. So, I mean, I think in the upper $8 million, and that's just for TOD. I still think that there's a lot of promise with that. These were vetted with affordable housing developers. So we had a number of meetings, particularly with Dream Key and some of the others, and saying, okay, like tell me, like what can I do to create some flexibility that would really move the needle? And so that's really where this list came from.
Awesome, thank you. And then just two
So
more.
I'm feeling very optimistic about them.
Thank you. Just two more. As I see here, the potential waiver of new street requirements, as we think about a holistic view of planning, we know we talk a lot about our infrastructure piece. I'll leave that for Mr. Bakari's soapbox, but how do we think about, or I'd love for us to think about how we set up criteria here so that we are very thoughtful about not exacerbating that problem in key areas our infrastructure need. And then finally, when we talk about building to a zoning district standards of next greater intensity, I really, really want us to be prescriptive about where and how we apply that, because we don't want to undermine the policy map that we have. Those were set for a reason, and especially as we go through the area planning process, as of course I'm preaching to the choir, we want to make sure that the community's desires and what makes sense for that area is respected. And so just want to make sure that this one here, we really think about how that's going to be implemented. So those are my comments, but great job. Did you have something?
I was just going to say, we did work really closely with CDOT, and we can talk about that offline or another time about when a new street requirement is critical to the infrastructure and, connectivity, and when we could talk about maybe just reserving it, not actually constructing it. And then on the moving up to the next zoning district or zoning district in one that's not even on the ground today, and so you couldn't really even like start to jump, place types. But so we've kind of looked at how we can make sure that we're keeping the policy map intact in terms of allowing this. So it's really within that place type.
Got it. So thank you. Ms. Johnson, did you have a follow-up?
Yes. So I just want to go back to the 30%. That AMI, that might be an opportunity if we could take a look at, that might be a group where we could take a look at waiving some of those. Maybe we could incorporate that extra incentive. And I know that you're going to take a look at to see where that money can come from. I also want to talk about home ownership. We talk about that, and I think that that's important. But from a lending perspective, in order to qualify for those loans, you have to earn 3 times, or you can only afford 3 times the amount of your household income. So for that couple that's earning $45,000, they would only qualify for a $135,000 home. And that's the issue. So how do we make housing more affordable? And is that, selling that lumber or the deed restrictions? But that's the issue. If we could address that, then home ownership is going to increase. So I don't know if that's more down payment assistance so that they can afford more, or but that's the issue. It's qualifying, it's getting the loan for the home and the cost of housing in the area. I don't know if we can restrict corporate buying and make the competition more realistic, but that's the issue. And then lastly, since Mr. Powers is at the table, sorry, I wanted to ask you about other communities in the state about impact fees and inclusionary zoning. So I didn't mean for you to be here, Mr. Bakari, when you weren't here when I thought about it. You weren't here when I was going to ask the question. But I want to know the status of that, or why we're not able to do that here in Charlotte. Thank you.
I hear 2 questions in your question. One is the impact fee issue, and one's inclusionary zoning. I will say for at least the inclusionary zoning component, that is a Tari Hagler Gray question, since she is your zoning attorney and set with council. So I would direct that to Patrick Baker and Tari for a more appropriate response statewide in that regard. I can address your impact fee question in the sense of North Carolina has been trending in a more adverse manner about impact fees. Cases have come out over the years about impact fees being completely illegal and unconstitutional, and has been trending in a more adversarial manner outside the initial scope of having an impact fee for schools. Typically, those cases in the past were if a school was being built in a particular area, you would assess fees for developers because a school was needed due to the impact of those new developments for townhomes, single-family homes in that area. That type of case law has trended in a more adverse direction of impacting just beyond the school systems to other types of situations like fees for water, fees for possibly development and permitting, and also fees for like short-term rentals. Those are areas where they're seeing new types of lawsuits assessing that these fees are impact fees, not necessarily improper fees to begin with. So the law has been moving against cities. The climate's a little bit more hostile in regards to us assessing those fees. I'm not sure if I'm fully answering your question, but I'm just trying to give you a broad brush of what the law is currently, as I understand it.
Okay. All right, so there are no state no cities in North Carolina that have impact.
To your former question, definitely no.
No cities.
Impact fees are illegal under the law, so they can't be assessed. We have to have statutory authority to assess a fee. If they're not, then technically they're illegal, and generally developers are using the language of impact fee as a basis to challenge that and possibly recover those costs.
For the other fees.
Yes,
All right, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. With that, we'll move to our last item. Assistant City Manager, did you want to speak to this at all, or is it sufficient that we've got our next meeting November 7th?
Excuse me, Chair Watlinson. So just to wrap that up,
Oh,
we were looking for some guidance from committee today.
Sure.
So the question is really, given the constraints that we're operating under, and also the other opportunities that we've laid out for reducing the cost of affordable housing, would committee like for staff to go back and put together a proposal around reimbursing fees?
I'd like to, okay, I hear a yes. Are we getting a consensus from the committee in regards to moving forward with putting together a proposal for reimbursement fees, what was shared with us today? How are folks feeling?
Some research at least, yeah, of where the fees would
Yeah.
come from, and yeah.
I support research.
Thank you.
I'm going to vote no, but I'll tell you why, because I prefer that we have a more comprehensive approach towards everything, particularly, we've talked a lot about the fact that all of our permitting and zoning processes add over 30% overhead into the cost of housing. So I don't think it's prudent for us to do one-off decisions, no matter how warranted they may or may not be, until we decide what the broader strategic mission is. So that's why I'd be a no, but.
So
again,
to
just
that
telling you.
end, and we're not going to take a formal vote here, just
Okay,
getting
good.
reading. To that end, what would you like to see in addition to what was brought today that would get you more comfortable?
I would just like to see an entire holistic view of the costs that all of our entire process that gets bucketed into this 30% or more of overhead that is placed onto the cost of housing, to see a true analysis. That's not something I don't think anyone's going to have right now. It's a
Right.
body of work, but I would like to see that holistically, and whether it's, a proposed approach on impact fees or rerouting of other, I just need to see where all that fits into the bigger puzzle so that we can truly understand how we're going to move forward with a policy decision that enables us to say, here's the impact we're making.
Does that make sense? Okay. All right. And so with that, just one rapid fire round before we leave. I just want to hear, what's your current local obsession? Neighborhood businesses that have opened or anything like that? I can say for me, QC Lava Grill, their Thai chili lime wings, give them a try. They're on West Boulevard. That's mine. If anybody's got any other local business they'd love to shout out, we can close with that. And if not, that's okay. I expect one for next time.
My favorite is the ramen bar uptown, Jenya.
Ah,
Jenya Ramen is my favorite place.
I like it.
Easy Like Sunday is a great breakfast place.
Yes, agreed. All right, well, thank y'all. I appreciate you. We'll see you next time.